All right, let's jump right into this explainer and demystify the complex, honestly encyclopedic universe of Bleach's Soul Reapers. If you've been following this iconic series, you know the world building is just next level, and the lore runs incredibly deep. So today, we're going to break down the origins, the weapons, and the intricate military hierarchy of these spiritual guardians.
It really all starts with this one fundamental question. Who actually governs the flow of souls between the human world and the afterlife? Well, in the Bleach universe, that massive job falls to a fictional race of spirits known as the Soul Reapers, or Shinigami, which literally translates to death gods. They're essentially the unseen arbiters making sure the delicate balance between the living and the afterlife, the Soul Society, stays intact.
So, here is our roadmap for today. 1. Who are Soul Reapers? 2. Swords, spirits, and spells. 3. The 13 Court Guard Squads. 4. Specialists of the Gotei. And 5. The Elite Royal Guard.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1. Who are Soul Reapers?
Okay, what's really fascinating here is the sheer contrast between series creator Tide Kubo's initial concept and the iconic final design we're all so familiar with today. Early on, Kubo actually pictured male Soul Reapers wearing black suits and carrying guns, but, he felt that look was just a bit too generic. So he drew inspiration from traditional Japanese literature instead. He shifted the aesthetic to kimonos and swapped out the guns for swords. It is wild to think about how different the whole vibe of the series could have been, right?
Within the lore, Soul Reapers have some very specific traits and duties. For starters, they age at a much slower rate than humans, and they're completely invisible to anyone without spiritual awareness. Their main day-to-day job is performing konso, or soul funerals. This is basically a ritual that safely guides wandering spirits over to the Soul Society. But if a soul hangs around the human world for too long, it gets corrupted and turns into a monstrous, highly dangerous entity called a hollow. And defeating those hollows to restore balance, that's absolutely priority number 1.
Moving on to Section 2, Swords, Spirits, and Spells.
So, every Soul Reaper is armed with a Zanpakuto, a soul-cutting sword. But look, this is no ordinary weapon you just pick up at a blacksmith. A Zanpakuto is a living spiritual entity. It shares this incredibly deep symbiotic connection with its wielder because it's literally forged from the owner's own soul. The sword actually evolves alongside them, reflecting their inner personality and their latent power. As a Reaper levels up, they experience a massive jump in power. When they learn the true name of their sword spirit, they can release it from its basic sealed state into its shikai, or initial release. This totally changes the weapon's form and unlocks specialized abilities. And then, beyond that, lies the Bankai, the final release. This ultimate form boosts their power exponentially, but it is notoriously tough to achieve. We're talking a minimum of 10 solid years of training just to master it.
But they don't just rely on their swords. Many Soul Reapers also use Kido, which translates to Wave the Demon. This is a highly structured magic system that works by reciting very specific incantations. The spells are ranked from 1 to 99 based on how complex they are, and they are incredibly versatile. You can use them for devastating attacks, impenetrable defense, or even healing severe wounds. And if you're a true master, you can completely bypass the spoken incantation and just cast the spell instantly in the heat of battle.
Let's dive into Section 3, the 13 Court Guard Squads.
Better known in the lore as the Gotei 13, this is the central organization and the main military power protecting the Soul Society. Like the name says, it's divided into 13 very distinct squads, each run by a captain and a lieutenant. Interestingly, they originally started out as a group of the absolute deadliest killers in the afterlife before slowly evolving over the centuries into the structured, more peace-oriented military force we see today.
Now, you might be wondering, how do you actually become a captain in this setup? Well, there are 3 distinct ways. The most common is a proficiency test, where you have to demonstrate your Bankai in front of at least 3 existing captains. The second way is purely through a stellar reputation. You need personal recommendations from 6 captains, plus approval from 3 more. But that third method, it is absolutely brutal. You can literally just challenge an existing captain to a one-on-one duel to the death, provided you have an audience of 200 witnesses from that specific squad.
Sitting at the absolute top of this entire military food chain is head captain Genyu-sai Shigekuni Yamamoto. He doesn't just command Squad 1, he is the overarching leader of the entire Gotei 13. Yamamoto is a living legend. He actually founded the Soul Reaper Academy a full 1,000 years before the main story even begins. He has absolute authority.
And he famously claims that not a single Soul Reaper born in the last millennium has been stronger than him.
And honestly, he is not bluffing. His Zanpakuto Ryujin Jaka is the most powerful fire-type sword in existence. Its release command is basically an apocalyptic promise: reduce all creation to ash. When Yamamoto pops his Bankai, the heat hits a staggering 15 million degrees. To put that into perspective, it is so unfathomably hot that just turning it on drains all the moisture in the Soul Society. If he leaves it active for too long, he risks completely destroying the entire realm. It's just insane power.
All right, let's look at Section 4, Specialists of the Gotei. You see, not all 13 squads are just standard infantry. Several of them have highly specific mandates, and each one is symbolized by a flower whose meaning captures their entire philosophy. Squad 2 handles stealth and covert assassinations, represented by Splendor. Squad 4 is the dedicated medical and supply division, marked by fidelity. Squad 11, they are all about brute sword-only combat, unsurprisingly represented by battle. And Squad 12 acts as the Scientific Research Institute, symbolized by revenge and independence. The contrast inside these squads can be pretty startling. Take Squad 4's captain, Retsu Unahana. These days, she comes across as this incredibly serene, softly spoken, maternal figure running the medical division. But her backstory? Totally shocking. She was actually one of the founding members of the Gotei 13 and was once considered the most diabolical criminal in the entire Soul Society. She literally invented the art of killing and was the very first person to hold the blood-soaked title of Kenpachi long before she ever became a master healer.
Then, you pivot over to the chilling vibe of Squad 12, led by Captain Mayuri Kurotsuchi. Mayuri is your quintessential mad scientist, running the Soul Reaper Research and Development Institute. He views absolutely everything and everyone as a potential lab rat. And that complete disregard for life, it extends to himself too. He has heavily and honestly quite horrifyingly modified his own body, turning himself into a living weapon stuffed with hidden tools and lethal poisons.
Now, by stark contrast, Squad 11 couldn't care less about science or magic. They live entirely for the thrill of the fight. Their leader, Captain Kenpachi Zaraki, embodies this perfectly. Remember that brutal third method to become a captain we talked about? Yeah, he's one of the rare few who actually did it. He killed the previous captain in front of 200 witnesses. Comically enough, Zaraki has a notoriously terrible sense of direction, but his sheer, terrifying raw physical power and insatiable bloodlust make him an absolute force of nature.
And that brings us to our final section, Part 5, the Elite Royal Guard.
Above all the standard 13 squads sits an incredibly enigmatic faction known as Squad 0, or the Royal Guard. They don't even operate within the standard Soul Society. Instead, they live way up in the heavens inside the Soul King Palace. Their one paramount duty is the absolute protection of the Soul King himself, the linchpin entity whose very existence holds the fabric of the entire Bleach universe together.
And you don't just pass a test to get into Squad 0. Every single member is a former captain who was specifically promoted because they made a history-altering contribution that completely changed the Soul Society. For example, Tenjiro Kirinji literally invented the healing hot springs that purge impure blood. Kiryo Hikifune created the artificial souls used by Reapers. And the commander, Ichibei Hayasube, he is credited with coining the names for absolutely everything in the Soul Society, even the term Zanpakuto itself.
Speaking of Commander Ichibei, his power is practically godlike. His weapon, Ichimonji, doesn't even look like a normal sword at first. It's a massive calligraphy brush that controls the very concept of blackness. With just a swing of this brush, anything covered by its ink is completely stripped of its name and its power. His weapon is so incredibly ancient that its ultimate release form predates the invention of the word Bankai. He calls it Shunuchi instead.
But we gotta end on this incredibly provocative thought, which was revealed deep within the expanded lore of the Bleach light novels. While Squad 0 presents themselves as the noble protectors of the Soul King, their true loyalties actually lie with the Soul Society's 4 great noble houses. Their real objective isn't just protection, they're essentially his jailers, tasked with containing the Soul King to brutally maintain the status quo by any means necessary. So it forces us to ask, are the ultimate authorities of the Soul Reapers actually the good guys, or just enforcers of a deeply sinister cosmic prison? It's a massive twist that kind of changes how you view everything we've talked about today.